My name is Erica Juarez, and at 27 years old, as a captain in the United States Marine Corps, I thought I could handle anything. I was wrong. In the middle of a sun-drenched garden, dressed in immaculate white, my own brother punched me in the face at my wedding. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't the clumsy stumble of a man who'd had too much champagne. It was a punch, swift and precise, that connected with my cheekbone, sent a crackling shockwave through my jaw, and splattered blood across the delicate white lace of my dress. A moment I will never, ever forget. 1 second, I was holding my handwritten vows. The next, I was stumbling backward, my head spinning as my veil slid from my shoulder. A dead silence fell over the garden. He thought he had silenced me for good. He had no idea the 4 words my husband was about to say would destroy his entire career. If you want to know what those 4 words were, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever had the people closest to you try to pull you down just as you were starting to rise. The first thing I registered after the impact wasn't the pain. It was the silence. As an intelligence officer, I'm trained to analyze soundscapes, to understand the ambient noise of a given environment. The silence that fell over my wedding was not an absence of noise, it was a physical presence. It was a thick, heavy blanket that smothered the gentle notes of the string quartet, the polite chatter of guests, and the rustle of the warm California breeze through the manicured palm trees. The silence was a pressure in my ears, a roaring vacuum where life had been just a moment before. In that vacuum, my senses sharpened to a razor's edge. I could hear the shush of the wind, a lonely sound against the collective held breath of 100 people. Somewhere to my left, a champagne flute slipped from a nerveless hand and shattered on the stone patio, a sharp, crystalline explosion in the stillness. Beneath it all, I heard the frantic, percussive drumming of my own heart against my ribs, a desperate Morse code signal in a world that had gone deaf. My training kicked in, a cold and unwelcome reflex. I did a threat assessment of the scene. The perpetrator, my brother, Gunnery Sergeant Ryan Juarez, stood 2 feet away, his fist still slightly clenched. His face wasn't a mask of rage, it was worse. It was a canvas of smug satisfaction, the look of a man who believed he had just restored the natural order of things. The secondary actors, our guests, were frozen in a tableau of disbelief. I scanned their faces, cataloging their reactions. My commanding officer, Colonel Thompson, his face rigid with shock. My college friends from UVA, their mouths hanging open in horror. Fellow officers, men and women I'd served with. Their expressions unreadable, but their bodies locked in parade rest stillness. They were all witnesses, yet no one moved. No one stepped forward. In that moment, surrounded by the people who were supposed to be my community, my support system, the feeling of absolute isolation was as sharp and clear as the pain now blooming in my jaw. I was an island, and the sea around me was made of their shock. And then, someone did move. It was my mother. For a fraction of a second, a primal childish hope flared in my chest. It was an instinct I thought I had trained out of myself years ago, the hope that a mother would run to her injured child. I envisioned an embrace, a comforting word, a shield against the horror of the moment. The hope died as quickly as it was born. My mother walked right past me. Her eyes, for a brief moment, flickered over my face, over the blood welling on my lip. But there was no recognition, no alarm. It was as if I were a piece of furniture she had to navigate around. She moved with a stiff, determined gait directly to Ryan. My mind, the analytical part of me, recorded her every action with chilling precision. She placed a perfectly manicured hand gently on his bicep, not to restrain him, but to soothe him. Her voice, when she spoke, was not a roar of maternal fury. It was an urgent, controlled whisper, the kind one uses to correct a child's public misbehavior. "Ryan, what are you doing?" she hissed. "People are watching." That was it. Not the punch. Not the shattering pain in my face. It was those 5 words that truly broke my heart. Her first concern was not for her daughter's safety or dignity, but for the family's image, for the optics. The confirmation of a truth I'd always known but never wanted to face landed with the force of a physical blow. In my mother's world, I was merely a supporting character, a prop in the grand drama of her golden son. My gaze then shifted, searching for my father. He stood near the floral archway where I had been about to pledge my life to another man. A retired master sergeant, his face was, as always, an impassive mask. But his eyes found mine, and in them I saw no comfort, no rage on my behalf. I saw a cold, hard glint of disappointment. It was an expression I knew well. It didn't say, "I'm so sorry this happened to you." It said, "Why did you have to cause this scene?" His anger wasn't directed at the aggressor, it was directed at the disruption. In his world, order and discipline were paramount, and I, by becoming a victim so publicly, had created a chaotic, embarrassing breach. I realized then that I hadn't just been assaulted by my brother, I had been judged and found wanting by my own parents for the crime of being his target. They didn't see a daughter in pain. They saw a problem that was tarnishing a perfectly good afternoon. The feeling of abandonment was a physical thing, a cold weight settling in my stomach, threatening to pull me under. And just as I felt myself start to sink, another figure moved. It was Jack. He didn't charge Ryan. He didn't yell. His movements were calm, deliberate, an oasis of purpose in a desert of paralysis. He walked directly to my side. With one hand, he gently took my elbow, his touch a steady, grounding pressure. With his other, he reached into the breast pocket of his dress blues, pulled out his crisp, white pocket square, and with infinite care, began to dab at the blood on my lip. He said nothing. He didn't have to. His actions were a silent, unequivocal declaration. In a world that had collectively turned its back, he had turned toward me. He chose my side. The white fabric came away stained red, and he simply folded it over, continuing to clean the wound with a surgeon's focus. He was the only person in that entire garden who saw me, not the incident, not the scandal, but me. He finally lifted his gaze and met mine. His eyes, the color of a stormy sea, were filled with a cold, controlled fury that was entirely for me. He looked at me, and I knew, with the certainty of a well-executed battle plan, that the wedding was over. But the war had just begun. And looking at my mother's face across the lawn, at her blank, unfeeling expression, a sudden, chilling thought surfaced. That look. Where had I seen that look before? That look on my mother's face in the garden, that vacant, dismissive expression. It wasn't new. As I stood there, the metallic taste of blood in my mouth, the memory it triggered was so vivid it was almost a physical dislocation. The sunny California garden dissolved, replaced by the humid, pine-scented air of eastern North Carolina, 10 years earlier. I was 17 again, standing in the heart of the place that was supposed to be my home. Our house was just outside Marine Corps Base Camp Lejeune, in Jacksonville. It wasn't a home so much as a forward operating base for my father's ideals. Everything was militarily neat. Floors polished to a high gloss, furniture arranged in perfect 90-degree angles, not a speck of dust to be found. But there was no warmth, no softness. It was the kind of clean that feels sterile, unwelcoming. The air itself seemed to stand at attention. The currency of our household was strictly regulated. Conversations revolved around two approved topics: the Marine Corps and football. These were the twin pillars of my father and Ryan's world. A masculine domain of physical prowess, gridiron strategy, and unquestioning loyalty to the institution. My world, a quiet landscape of history books, classical literature, and philosophical debates I had only with myself, was treated like a foreign country with questionable politics. I was an alien in my own kitchen. I learned to hide my novels, tucking them under my mattress like contraband, because my father dismissed them as useless stuff that softens the brain. To him, strength was measured in push-ups and 40-yard dash times, not in the resilience of a character from a Jane Austen novel or the strategic brilliance of a Roman general I was studying. The memory that came flooding back was from Thanksgiving. The house was filled with the rich, savory smells of roasting turkey and my mother's green bean casserole. For once, I wasn't an outsider. I was vibrating with a secret, A piece of news so monumental I felt it could single-handedly realign the tectonic plates of our family dynamic. I had been holding on to it all day, waiting for the perfect moment at dinner, like a soldier waiting for the precise moment to launch a perfectly planned offensive. I had received a thick envelope from the University of Virginia a week earlier. Inside was an acceptance letter and the promise of a full ROTC scholarship. It wasn't just an acceptance, it was a validation of every late night I'd spent studying, every extracurricular I'd joined, every sacrifice I'd made while Ryan was out being the local football hero. UVA was one of the best schools in the country. And this scholarship was my ticket out, my declaration of independence. When the pumpkin pie was served, I took a deep breath and laid the crisp, official letter on the table beside my plate. "I have some news," I announced, my voice trembling slightly with excitement. My father picked it up, his eyes scanning the page with a practiced efficiency. My mother leaned over his shoulder. For a moment, there was a flicker of something. Was it pride? But then Ryan, sitting across from me, reached for the pitcher of cranberry juice. He saw the letter. I watched his eyes lock onto the university crest, onto the words, Naval Reserve Officers Training Corps. His expression, a familiar mix of disdain and rivalry, tightened for a split second. Then, with a gesture of practiced, almost theatrical clumsiness, his elbow knocked the heavy glass pitcher. A wave of dark, sticky red liquid surged across the table, engulfing my letter in a crimson tide. "Oops, sorry," he said, the apology utterly devoid of sincerity. He smirked at me. "Desk jockey paperwork stains easy." I stared, speechless, at the soggy, ruined paper. The deep red stain spreading across the official letterhead, bleeding into the ink of my name, was the exact same shade as the blood that would one day stain the white lace of my wedding dress. It was a prophecy written in juice. But Ryan's casual cruelty wasn't the fatal blow. The real wound, the one that would fester for a decade, came from my parents. My father let out a short, hearty laugh. A real laugh. He slapped the table, genuinely amused. "Attaboy, Ryan. Always the klutz," he said, shaking his head with affection. Then he turned his dismissive gaze to me, seeing not my devastation, but a minor inconvenience. "Come on, Erica. It's just a piece of paper. Don't make a big deal out of it. You can print another one. Just a piece of paper. My future, my triumph, my escape. Just a piece of paper." My mother, ever the peacekeeper, swooped in to manage the situation. She handed me a paper towel, her movements brisk and efficient, her face showing only a mild annoyance at the mess. She didn't look at my face, didn't acknowledge the tears welling in my eyes. She turned immediately to her son, her voice bright and eager to change the subject. "Ryan, honey, tell your father about the game plan for Havelock High. Is the coach finally going to let you run that trick play?" And just like that, I was erased. I sat there, a useless, soggy paper towel in my hand, watching the dark red liquid drip from the table onto the floor. It wasn't just my achievement that they had rendered invisible. It was my pain, my feelings. My very existence in that moment was less important than a high school football game. I was a ghost at their table. I didn't cry that night. Crying, I'd already learned, was a tactical error in our house. It was a sign of weakness my father scorned, a source of satisfaction for Ryan, and an irritation for my mother that gave her another reason to call me too sensitive. So, I did what I always did. I retreated. I took the ruined letter to my room, closed the door, and carefully used my hairdryer on the lowest setting to dry the sticky, warped pages. Once it was as flat as I could get it, I slid the letter into a clear plastic sheet protector, the kind you use for a school report. It felt like preserving a battlefield artifact. I tucked it deep into my bottom drawer, beneath old yearbooks and outgrown sweaters. It was a profound lesson. It taught me that my victories were mine alone, and so were my wounds. Seeking validation or comfort from them was a losing strategy. That night, I stopped trying to win their approval. A different kind of resolve hardened inside me, a cold and quiet determination. I would build a fortress inside myself, brick by silent brick. I would succeed, not for their applause, but to prove their dismissive world wrong. And I would do it all in silence. The question that haunted me after the Thanksgiving dinner fiasco was a simple one. If my family was the first battlefield, how was I supposed to survive in an institution designed by men exactly like my brother? The answer, I discovered, was that you don't just survive. You make yourself a weapon they can't break. My transformation began at Officer Candidate School in Quantico, Virginia. I arrived in the dead of a damp, bone-chilling Virginia winter that felt designed to seep into your soul. Quantico has a saying, "The place where weakness comes to die." From day one, it was clear this philosophy was applied with religious fervor. The world shrank to the immediate, brutal reality of screaming drill instructors, the smell of mud and sweat, and the constant grinding exhaustion that became your new normal. And the eyes. I felt them on me constantly. I wasn't just another candidate in the sea of shaved heads and green and brown camouflage. I was a female officer candidate. A 5'6", 130-pound question mark in a world built for men twice my size. Every time I completed a run or scaled an obstacle, I felt the weight of their collective gaze, a mixture of curiosity, doubt, and, from some, outright resentment. On the third day, a gunnery sergeant with a jaw like a block of granite and a voice like gravel in a blender stopped our platoon during a drill. He walked slowly down the line, his eyes scanning each of us, then stopped directly in front of me. He leaned in, his face inches from mine. "Ladies," he bellowed, though he was only looking at me and the 4 other women in the platoon. "Let me be crystal clear. There are no princesses here. This is not a debutante ball. If you feel the need to cry, you pack your bags and go home to mommy. Do you understand me?" "Yes, gunnery sergeant," we screamed back in unison. The threat didn't scare me. It didn't even anger me. In a strange way, it was comforting. It was a language I understood. This was a place where the rules, however harsh, were clear. It wasn't like my family, where the attacks were cloaked in fake smiles and passive aggression. Here, the hostility was honest. The fortress I had started building inside myself that Thanksgiving night simply got another layer of reinforced steel. I would not cry. I would not break. I would become granite, just like him. The ultimate test of that resolve came a few weeks later, during a nightland navigation exercise. The forest was pitch black, a suffocating darkness that swallowed the beam of our red lens flashlights. The air was cold and wet, clinging to our uniforms. We had a map, a compass, and a series of points to find before sunrise. Our fire team leader was a former college football player from Texas, a mountain of a man who carried himself with the unshakable confidence of someone who had never been told no. About an hour in, as we were trying to get a bearing, the compass was dropped. When our team leader picked it up, the needle was spinning uselessly. It was broken. A wave of quiet panic rippled through the group. The team leader's face tightened. His eyes immediately darted to me. "Juarez," he grunted, "did you drop this?" It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. The implication was clear. The woman, the smaller, less reliable member of the team, must have been the one to screw up. The old Erica would have felt a surge of indignation and argued that he was the one holding it. But the Quantico Erica, the weapon I was forging myself into, remained silent. Arguing was a waste of energy, a resource I couldn't afford to spend. Instead, I just looked up. Above the dense canopy of trees, the sky was clear and peppered with a million icy stars. I remembered all those nights in my backyard in North Carolina, escaping the tension in the house by losing myself in the cosmos with my cheap telescope, the hobby my father had called useless daydreaming. I found the Big Dipper. From there, my eyes traced the familiar path to Polaris, the North Star. It hung there, a steady, reliable anchor in the vast, swirling darkness. My mind started working, calculating angles, visualizing the map, placing our position relative to that single point of light. The voices of my teammates faded into a low hum. It was just me and the stars. After a minute, I lowered my gaze. "That way," I said, my voice flat and certain, pointing through the trees. "We need to head that way." The team leader stared at me, his expression a mix of disbelief and contempt. "You think you can navigate by a damn star?" "I know I can. I replied, my tone leaving no room for debate. For a long moment, no one moved. They were lost, and I was offering a way out, but accepting it meant trusting the person they had already decided was the weak link. Finally, with a frustrated sigh, the team leader grunted, "Fine. We'll try it your way, Juarez. But if we end up in a swamp, it's on you." We moved through the forest in a tense silence, but as we found the first point and then the second, the silence began to change. We made it back to the rendezvous point just as the first hints of dawn were breaking the horizon, well within our allotted time. Our drill instructor was waiting. "Compass break on you, candidates?" he asked, a knowing look on his face. "Yes, Gunnery Sergeant," our team leader answered. "Who got you back?" The team leader hesitated, looking at the ground. No one said a word. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken truth. Finally, the instructor just nodded slowly. He didn't ask again. There was no public praise, no "well done, Juarez," no recognition at all. But as we marched back to the barracks, I saw it. A few of my male teammates glanced at me, their expressions different now. It wasn't admiration. It was something more valuable, a grudging, resentful respect. For me, in that silent, cold morning, that was a victory louder than any medal. It was a battle I had won without firing a single shot. It was a small victory, but it was mine. If you've ever had a moment like that, a quiet win that no one else acknowledged, but that meant the world to you, hit that like button and comment, "I see you," below. Let's see each other. Months later, when I graduated and pinned the silver bars of a second lieutenant to my collar, I made the mistake of calling Ryan. I still had that flicker of hope, I guess. The call was short. After I told him the news, there was a pause and then a dry, humorless chuckle on the other end of the line. "Well, congrats, Second Lieutenant," he said, drawing out my new rank like it was an insult. "Guess you can sit behind a desk now and tell real Marines like me what to do. Just try not to get anyone killed with one of your fancy maps." He hung up. I stood there in my perfectly pressed uniform, looking at the reflection of the 2 silver bars in the mirror. I had paid a steep price for them, earned through sweat, isolation, and sheer force of will. And to my family, they were still just a punchline to a joke I wasn't in on. After the cold, damp crucible of Quantico, the Marine Corps sent me to the desert. It was a complete sensory shock, trading the oppressive humidity of Virginia for the dry, searing heat of the Mojave. My new post was the Marine Corps Air Ground Combat Center in 29 Palms, California. A sprawling, unforgiving landscape of sand, rock, and relentless sun. It was a place where everything, from the spiky Joshua trees to the scorpions hiding under the rocks, seemed capable of cutting or burning you. The heat wasn't just in the air. It was a constant, oppressive pressure that mirrored the intensity of the training. We were engaged in a combined arms exercise, a massive war game designed to push every unit to its absolute breaking point. It was in this furnace, a place designed to strip away everything but the essentials, that I first met Major Jack Monroe. He was an FA-18 pilot, assigned to our command element as an air officer. In a world of loud, swaggering personalities, Jack was an anomaly. He was quiet, not in a shy or uncertain way, but with a deep, self-contained stillness. He didn't boast about his flight hours or tell exaggerated stories. He observed. He listened. And when he spoke, his words were precise, economical, and carried an unnerving weight of authority that made everyone else, even the colonels, pause and listen. He was a stark contrast to the blunt force instrument that was my brother and the performative masculinity of my father. Jack's strength wasn't a performance. It was a fundamental state of being. My battlefield here wasn't the physical terrain, but the chaotic heart of the Command Post Exercise, or CPX. It was a massive tent, humming with the noise of generators and filled with the glow of dozens of computer monitors. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee, sweat, and rising tension. Infantry officers, my brother's people, were yelling into radios, their voices raw with stress. Reports were contradictory, intelligence was flawed, and the simulated enemy was closing in. It was a storm of noise and ego. I said nothing. My job as an intelligence officer wasn't to shout the loudest, it was to find the signal in the noise. I sat at my station, a calm island in the middle of the hurricane, meticulously cross-referencing topographic maps with live drone feeds and fragmented intel reports from the field. I was fighting a war on paper, a silent battle of patterns and probabilities. The shouting men around me saw a map with friendly and enemy icons. I saw a story unfolding, a narrative of deception. And deep within that narrative, I found a flaw. A critical vulnerability in the enemy's defensive line that everyone, in their frantic haste, had overlooked. I was marshaling my evidence, preparing to present my findings in the precise, emotionless language the command respected, when a shadow fell over my map. I looked up to see Major Monroe standing beside me. He hadn't said a word, but his presence cut through the surrounding chaos. He leaned over my shoulder, and my breath caught. He pointed a single, steady finger to the exact grid coordinate I had been staring at. "They're baiting us," he said, his voice low, meant only for me. "A feint to draw our armor into the open. Their main force is here, shielded by this ridge." He looked at me, a question in his eyes. "Aren't they, Captain?" I could only nod, momentarily stunned. He hadn't just seen the map. He had seen the battle I was fighting. In a tent full of men who saw me as either a checkbox for diversity or an administrative assistant, this quiet pilot had looked at my work and seen a fellow strategist. For the first time in my professional life, I felt seen. That moment changed everything. Later that evening, after the exercise had paused for the night, I was in the makeshift MWR tent, a sad canvas structure with a few folding chairs and a cooler of lukewarm sodas. I was unwinding the only way I knew how, by reading a worn, dog-eared paperback copy of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. I saw Jack enter the tent. He grabbed a bottle of water, and instead of sitting with the other officers who were loudly recounting the day's events, he walked over to my corner. I braced myself for the usual small talk, the awkward questions about what a woman like me was doing in a place like this. But he just nodded at my book. "Marcus Aurelius," he said. "I've always liked the part where he writes, 'The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way.'" I was so surprised I almost dropped the book. He wasn't just showing off that he recognized the name, he had engaged with the ideas. He understood it. "That's my favorite passage," I finally managed to say. "It's the story of my life, I think." "Mine too," he said, pulling up a chair. Our conversation that night lasted for hours, but we barely spoke about the Marine Corps. We talked about Stoic philosophy, about Roman history, about the quiet, unseen burdens of leadership. He asked me what I thought about the historian Will Durant, and I asked him if he preferred the strategic mind of Scipio Africanus over Hannibal. He spoke with a passion and intelligence that was utterly devoid of ego. It was the kind of conversation I'd only ever dreamed of having, the kind I used to have with the authors of the books my father despised. For the first time since I could remember, I wasn't a female officer. I wasn't Ryan's little sister. I was just a person, a mind, being listened to and understood by another. The exercise ended a few days later. As the controlled chaos of disassembly began, with everyone packing gear and preparing to leave the desert behind, Jack made his way through the crowd towards me. He was holding a steaming white styrofoam cup. "Black, 2 sugars, right?" he said, handing it to me. I hadn't even realized he'd noticed how I took my coffee. "Thank you," I said, my fingers wrapping around the warmth of the cup. "You were the sharpest mind in that tent, Erica," he said, using my first name for the first time. His voice was quiet, but his words landed with more force than any of the shouting I'd heard all week. "Don't ever let their noise drown out your quiet." That simple statement, delivered with a cup of cheap coffee, was more validating than any medal or commendation I had ever received. It wasn't a line. It wasn't a compliment designed to get a reaction. It was a statement of fact from one professional to another. It was recognition. And as I stood there in the brutal, unforgiving heat of the Mojave Desert, I felt something inside me, something I thought had been permanently frozen over at Quantico, begin to thaw. It felt a little like hope. The hope that had begun to sprout in the Mojave Desert followed me back to the coast. Jack and I were both stationed in San Diego, me at Marine Corps Air Station Miramar, him at the nearby Naval Air Station North Island. The city's sunshine and ocean breeze felt like a world away from the grit of the desert and the cold stone of my past. Our connection, forged in the heat of the exercise, deepened into something real and steady. With Jack, I felt a sense of peace I'd never known. For the first time, the fortress inside me didn't feel like a prison, but a home I could finally invite someone into. Then, one Tuesday evening, my past called. Literally. I saw my mother's name flash on my phone screen, and that fragile peace shattered. "Erica, honey, how are you?" Her voice was unnaturally sweet, a syrupy tone she only used when she wanted something. My internal alarms, honed over 2 decades of practice, began to sound. "I'm fine, Mom. What's up?" "Well, I have the most wonderful news. Your father and I are driving down to San Diego this weekend to visit your brother. And we were thinking, we absolutely must have a little barbecue so we can finally meet this wonderful Jack we've heard so much about." A cold knot formed in my stomach. This wasn't a friendly invitation. It was a summons. It was an inspection. Ryan was stationed at Camp Pendleton, just an hour up the coast, a world of difference from the pilot community at Miramar. This was a deliberate incursion into my new life. She wasn't asking, she was informing. I hesitated, the word no on the tip of my tongue. I glanced at Jack, who was watching me from across the room. He saw the tension in my face, the way my hand tightened on the phone. He walked over, took my free hand in his, and gave it a gentle squeeze. His eyes were calm and steady. "We'll face them together," he mouthed silently. His strength flowed into me. "Okay, Mom," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. "We'll be there." The barbecue took place in the backyard of Ryan's rented duplex in Oceanside, a classic slice of American military suburbia. A manicured patch of unnaturally green grass, a cheap charcoal grill spitting smoke, and a cooler overflowing with ice and cans of Budweiser. The air smelled of lighter fluid and grilled hot dogs. It was a perfect portrait of normal family life, and it felt like a stage set for a horror movie. Ryan played the part of the gracious host with practiced ease, a beer in one hand, tongs in the other, holding court in front of the grill. He regaled my father and a few of his enlisted friends with loud, embellished stories of his latest training exploits. My father, in turn, puffed out his chest, soaking in the reflected glory of his warrior son. My role, as always, was to be the quiet, unobtrusive daughter. Jack's role, I soon learned, was to be the target. My father began the interrogation subtly. "So, Jack," he started, clapping him on the shoulder a little too hard. "Erica tells me you fly those fancy jets. Ryan here, he can run 3 miles in 17 minutes. What's your time?" Jack, who could easily match that time, just smiled politely. "That's impressive, sir. They don't time our 3-mile runs in the cockpit." It was a brilliant answer, deflecting the comparison without being disrespectful. I watched my father's smile falter for a fraction of a second, annoyed that his jab hadn't landed. The performance continued, a relentless series of passive-aggressive comparisons where Jack's career as an officer and a pilot was framed as somehow less authentic, less difficult than Ryan's life as a grunt. I felt like I was watching a play I'd seen 100 times, but this time, I wasn't in the audience alone. Jack was right there beside me, a silent, steady presence in the storm. The main event came after we had eaten, as the sun began to dip towards the Pacific. My father draped an arm around Jack's shoulders, pulling him into a man-to-man charade of camaraderie. "You know, Jack," he said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "This kid right here," he said, nodding at Ryan. "He was just nominated for non-commissioned officer of the quarter, a natural-born warrior." Then he turned his full attention to Jack, his eyes glinting. "Must be nice for you, though, huh? Sitting up there in that air-conditioned cockpit while the real work gets done on the ground." The insult was so blatant, so perfectly crafted to diminish Jack while elevating Ryan, that the air grew thick with it. I saw Jack's jaw tighten, a flicker of cold anger in his eyes, but his voice, when he spoke, was perfectly level. The AC is definitely helpful when you have to make a split-second decision at Mach 2, sir. But you're right. Gunnery Sergeant Juarez is a credit to the Corps. He had done it again. He had affirmed my father's premise, complimented my brother, and defended his own honor in a single, elegant sentence. I saw a flash of disappointment in my father's face. His weapon of choice, public humiliation, had failed to find its mark. The final act of the play was saved for me. Later, as I was helping my mother clear paper plates from the patio table and take them into the kitchen, she closed the sliding glass door behind us, shutting out the noise of the party. The moment we were alone, her sweet voice returned, now laced with a conspiratorial tone. "Erica, honey," she began, not looking at me as she scraped leftover potato salad into the trash. "There's something I need you to do." I braced myself. "Your brother? He's in a bit of a tough spot financially. He bought that new pickup truck, you see, and the payments are just a little more than he can handle right now." She finally turned to look at me, her eyes wide and pleading. "You're a captain now. Your salary is higher than his. I was thinking you could just help him out. Lend him some money to get him through. After all, that's what family is for, right? We help each other." And there it was, the real reason for the visit, the reason for the barbecue, the fake smiles, the forced pleasantries. They hadn't come to meet Jack. They had come for my money. I just stood there, speechless. The request wasn't just insulting, it was a complete erasure of my entire existence. My years of hard work, my struggles, my achievements. None of it meant anything. In their eyes, my success didn't make me worthy of respect. It just made me a more convenient resource. I wasn't their daughter, I was their ATM. And the rage that had been simmering beneath the surface all afternoon began to boil. The boiling rage I felt didn't manifest as a scream. It didn't come out in a torrent of tears or a slammed door. For years, my family had trained me to suppress, to contain, to endure. So the rage, when it finally crested, transformed into something else entirely. A terrifying, glacial calm. It was the same icy focus I felt in the CPX tent the moment before I identified the enemy's weakness. And right now, the enemy was standing in front of me, holding a dirty paper plate. I looked my mother straight in the eye. For the first time in my 27 years, the ingrained fear of her disapproval was gone, burned away by the sheer heat of my anger. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it landed in the space between us with the force of a gunshot. My mother blinked, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. It was a response so foreign to her, so outside the script of our family drama, that she couldn't immediately process it. "What? What did you say?" "I said no," I repeated, my voice steady, devoid of any tremor. "I will not be giving Ryan any money." The confusion on her face curdled into disbelief, then into indignation. It was the look of a monarch whose most loyal subject had just spat on her shoes. "Why on earth not?" she sputtered, her voice rising. "He's your brother." "He's a 30-year-old gunnery sergeant in the United States Marine Corps," I replied, my tone as cold and sharp as a bayonet. "He's responsible for his own choices, including buying a truck he can't afford. I am not his bank." The logic of my statement was irrefutable, and that made her even angrier. Backed into a corner, she did what she always did. She reached for her ultimate weapon, guilt. Her face transformed, melting into a mask of wounded sacrifice. "Ungrateful," she whispered, the word laced with venom. "After everything this family has done for you. Your father and your brother served in combat zones. They shed blood and sweat on the battlefield so that people like you," she said the word with a sneer, "could go to a nice college and sit safely in an air-conditioned office playing games on a computer. You owe them. You owe this family." It was her nuclear option, the argument designed to trigger all the insecurities they had so carefully planted in me over the years. The idea that my service was lesser, my accomplishments fraudulent, my life a debt I could never repay. In the past, it had always worked. It had always reduced me to a guilty, apologizing child. But this time, it didn't. This time, I didn't feel guilt. I felt nothing but a pure, liberating clarity. All the pieces of my life, all the injustices and slights, clicked into place. I remembered Jack's words to me in the desert. Don't ever let their noise drown out your quiet. And in that moment, I knew my quiet was over. I owe them nothing, I said, and my voice was no longer quiet. It was hard, and it was loud, and it echoed in the small kitchen. Let's be very clear. I got into the University of Virginia on my own academic scholarship. I endured and graduated from officer candidate school on my own strength. I wear this rank on my collar because I earned it, not because anyone handed it to me. I have paid every debt, Mom. My accounts are clear. The sound of our raised voices had drawn an audience. The sliding glass door opened, and my father and Ryan stepped inside, drawn by the scent of a conflict they assumed I would lose. Ryan had a smug, knowing smirk on his face. "What's the matter, little sister?" he sneered, leaning against the counter. "Don't want to share the wealth?" And that was it. That was the final push. The casual cruelty, the absolute certainty in his eyes that he was entitled to the fruits of my labor. The years of being invisible, of being second best, of being the family ATM. All of it coalesced into a single, unbreakable point of resolve. I turned from my mother and faced all three of them. My father, with his judgmental silence. My mother, with her manipulative tears now starting to well up. And Ryan, with his arrogant smirk. I stood up straight, my shoulders back, and for the first time in their presence, I wasn't their daughter or their sister. I was Captain Erica Juarez. "Listen up and listen carefully," I said, and the command in my voice made all three of them flinch. "This arrangement is over. There will be no more money. There will be no more excuses made for bad behavior. There will be no more me staying silent to keep this sham of a family peace alive. I am done." I took a breath, letting the words hang in the stunned silence. "From now on," I said, looking past them to the doorway where I knew Jack was standing, waiting. "Jack is my family. If you have ever had to draw that final, unbreakable line in the sand, hit that like button to support this moment and just comment 'done' below. You'll know what it means." I didn't wait for a response. The fortress inside me had not just been defended, its gates had been sealed forever. I turned my back on the three of them, on their shocked and furious faces. I walked out of the kitchen, right past Jack, and towards the front door. He didn't say a word, just fell into step beside me. I reached out, and my hand found his. Together, we walked out of that house, leaving behind the wreckage of a family that had just lost its last ounce of control over me and stepped out into the clean, cool California night. The drive back to our apartment in La Jolla was quiet, but it wasn't the heavy, oppressive silence I had grown up with. It was a different kind of quiet, the focused silence of two teammates after a skirmish, regrouping and assessing the field. The windows of Jack's old Jeep were down, and the cool, salty air of the Pacific washed over us, cleansing the stale, suffocating atmosphere of my brother's backyard. I watched the headlights cut a path through the darkness, my mind replaying the scene in the kitchen, my own voice echoing with a strength I hadn't known I possessed. I was the first to speak, breaking the comfortable silence. "I can't do this anymore, Jack," I said, my voice low but firm. "I won't let them ruin our wedding. I won't let him ruin it." Jack didn't take his eyes off the road, but he reached over and placed a hand on my knee, a simple gesture of solidarity. "I know," he said, "and we won't let that happen. But we're not going to fight him his way. We're not going to get into a shouting match or a fist fight. We're going to fight him our way." His words resonated deep within me. Our way. The way of the strategist. The way of the mind, not the fist. Later that night, the emotional storm had passed, leaving behind a cold, clear sense of purpose. We were in our small, book-filled apartment overlooking the ocean. I had my worn paperback copy of Sun Tzu's The Art of War on the coffee table, its pages filled with my notes. It had been my guide through the intellectual battles of Quantico and beyond. Jack disappeared into his study and came back with a thick, government-issue binder. He placed it on the table right next to my book. The title on the spine was stark and official: Manual for Courts Martial, United States, 2019 edition. Inside was the Uniform Code of Military Justice, the UCMJ. Your enemy, Jack said, tapping the cover of the UCMJ, has built his entire identity on this book. He worships the parts about rank, obedience, and aggression. He paused, his expression serious. But he's ignorant about the rest of it. He doesn't understand the parts about honor, conduct, and the integrity of the institution. He opened the binder to a well-marked page. There's an article in here, Article 134. It's often called the General Article. It's a catch-all for offenses that aren't specifically listed elsewhere. He ran his finger along the text. It covers all conduct of a nature to bring discredit upon the armed forces. It's about perception, Erica. It's about upholding the image of the service. A light went on in my mind. So, a public spectacle? Exactly, Jack confirmed. A brawl between family members at a barbecue is one thing. But a gunnery sergeant publicly assaulting a captain at her wedding, an event attended by dozens of other service members, including senior officers, is not just a personal attack. It's a flagrant violation of Article 134. It's professional suicide. I stared at the two books sitting side by side. On one side, ancient Chinese wisdom on strategy. On the other, the modern bedrock of American military law. The principles were the same. Sun Tzu wrote, "Know your enemy and know yourself, and you will not be imperiled in 100 battles." I knew my enemy. Ryan's entire world was the Marine Corps. His pride, his reputation, his sense of self-worth. It was all tied to his uniform and the respect he commanded from his subordinates. He saw the world in a simple, brutal hierarchy of physical strength. That was his weakness. He was a bull, powerful and direct. But he could only see the red cape, not the matador holding it. He only respects rank and force, I said, thinking aloud. The pieces of the puzzle clicking into place in my intelligence analyst brain. The concept of family means nothing to him in a confrontation. It's just a word he uses for leverage. But the title, officer? I trailed off, the idea crystallizing. Assault is a legal term. It's not hitting or fighting. It's a crime, a violation of the code. I looked up at Jack, my heart beating faster now, not with fear, but with the thrill of a winning strategy forming. The words, I said. You just assaulted an officer. Jack looked at me, and his eyes were filled with a profound admiration that felt more intimate than any kiss. He nodded slowly. Those 4 words, he said, his voice full of respect. They take away all his power. They reframe the entire event. He's no longer the dominant brother putting his uppity sister in her place. He's the subordinate who just committed a criminal act against a superior. He's no longer the aggressor. He's the defendant. And the audience he's trying to impress, the other Marines, they become the witnesses to his career's implosion. We weren't planning for a fight. We were planning a contingency. We hoped, we prayed, that my family would have the decency to let us have our one day in peace. But hope is not a strategy. We were no longer victims waiting for the next blow to fall. We were preparing for a battle on our terms. In the week leading up to the wedding, we didn't speak of the plan again. We sealed it away, a weapon held in reserve. Instead, we focused on building a fortress of peace around ourselves. We took long walks on the soft white sands of Coronado Beach, watching the Navy jets trace patterns in the sky. We drove to Old Town San Diego and found a tiny family-run place that served the best fish tacos I'd ever tasted. With fresh cilantro and a squeeze of lime, the flavors bright and clean. We sat on our little balcony, sipping coffee in the morning and listening to the seals barking down at the cove. It was a deliberate act of claiming our own happiness, of refusing to let the shadow of my family poison the beautiful life we were building together. We knew the storm was on the horizon. We knew our wedding day, the day that was supposed to be the happiest of our lives, might be turned into a battlefield. But this time, we were ready. We were 2 officers, a united front, prepared for a confrontation. And we would meet it not with anger or with fear, but with the most powerful weapons we possessed. Our calm, our intellect, and a deep, unshakable understanding of the world we lived in. The moment my brother's fist connected with my face, time didn't slow down. It fractured. The scene splintered into 1,000 sharp, distinct details, and the intelligence officer inside me, The part of me trained to observe under fire took control. There was the physical sensation, a bright, blinding flash of pain, the sickening crunch of bone and cartilage, and the coppery taste of blood flooding my mouth. Then came the auditory data. The collective gasp from our guests, the sharp crack of a champagne flute shattering on the stone patio, and underneath it all, the steady, rhythmic thumping of my own heart, like a drumbeat counting down to a planned detonation. But this time, unlike the first time I described this moment, there was no panic. There was no chaotic swirl of confusion. As I stumbled back, my pristine white dress now stained with a splash of crimson, I was watching. I was assessing. I saw the triumphant, satisfied sneer on Ryan's face, the look of a predator who had just asserted his dominance. I saw the blank, almost bored expression on my mother's face and the cold, annoyed glare from my father. I saw the frozen shock on the faces of our friends and commanding officers. I saw it all, not as a victim, but as a soldier in a well-laid ambush, watching the enemy walk directly into the kill zone. My part in the plan was over. I had been the bait. Now, it was Jack's turn. He moved. His actions were not the frantic, enraged movements of a man whose bride had just been attacked. They were deliberate, precise, and economical. The movements of a pilot executing a well-rehearsed emergency procedure. He took 2 steps forward, placing his body squarely between me and Ryan, creating a physical shield. His back was to me, but I could feel the coiled stillness in his posture. He looked at my brother, and his eyes, usually so warm and thoughtful, were as cold and gray as battleship steel. Then, he spoke. His voice wasn't a shout. It was calm, controlled, and projected with the clarity of a command that expected instant obedience. It cut through the dead, heavy silence like a razor. "Gunnery Sergeant, face the wall." The 4 words hit the air with the force of a sonic boom. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. The entire context of the afternoon shattered and reformed into something new. This was no longer an ugly family dispute at a wedding. This was a military command. This was a matter of order and discipline. The sneer on Ryan's face froze, then cracked, replaced by a slack-jawed confusion. His brain, which operated on a simple binary of force and submission, couldn't process this new input. He had been expecting a fistfight with Jack, a primal contest he was sure he would win. He was not prepared for a formal order from a superior officer. Before Ryan could formulate a response, my father surged forward, his face purple with rage. He was back on familiar ground, the patriarch defending his chosen son. "Jack, what the hell do you think you're doing?" "That's my son," he roared, jabbing a finger towards Jack's back. Jack didn't turn. He didn't even flinch. Keeping his eyes locked on Ryan, he replied in the cool, detached tone of an officer reporting an incident over a radio. "Sir, at approximately 15:32 hours, Gunnery Sergeant Juarez physically assaulted a superior officer in a public setting. He is now a security risk, and I am taking appropriate action to secure the situation." The formality, the precision of the language, the inclusion of the exact time. It was a verbal wall my father couldn't penetrate. I watched his face, and for the first time in my life, I saw pure helplessness in his eyes. His authority, the absolute, unquestioned power he wielded within our family, had just collided with a greater, more impersonal power, the uniform code of military justice. The very system he had spent his life revering and teaching his children to obey had just been used to render him irrelevant. He was no longer the father of the bride or the groom's father. He was just a civilian bystander. Ryan was still standing there, paralyzed by confusion, his mind trying to reconcile the image of his sister's fiancé with the reality of the major standing before him. Jack took 1 slow, deliberate step towards him. He looked my brother directly in the eye, and he delivered the final, devastating payload. He spoke just loudly enough for the cluster of officers standing nearby to hear every single word clearly. "You just assaulted an officer." Those 4 words were not an accusation. They were a verdict, a formal declaration of a crime. I watched the realization slam into Ryan with the force of a physical blow. The confusion on his face evaporated, replaced by a wave of raw, unfiltered panic. His eyes darted around, desperately searching for support, for someone to validate his actions, to join him in his contempt. He looked at the other Marines, his brothers in arms, the men whose respect was the foundation of his entire identity. He found none. All he received were cold, hard stares. Stares of disbelief, of disgust, of professional condemnation. In their eyes, he was no longer Ryan Juarez, the tough-as-nails grunt. He was a disgrace, a liability. A man who had just committed the cardinal sin of striking an officer, and a female one at that, at her own wedding. He had brought discredit upon the Corps. His career, his honor, his pride, the entire edifice of the identity he had so carefully constructed crumbled into dust in the space of 10 seconds. The color drained from his face, leaving a pasty gray pallor. The physical giant, the natural-born warrior, looked small, pathetic, and utterly defeated. He had lost. Not in a brawl, not in a contest of strength that he could understand. He had lost in a strategic chess match he never even knew he was playing. And I stood there, tasting my own blood, my white dress ruined, and felt the undeniable, exhilarating, and utterly ferocious satisfaction of victory. The clean, sharp satisfaction of victory is a fleeting thing. It burned brightly for a moment, a supernova of vindication in a sun-drenched garden. But supernovas, by their very nature, collapse. What's left behind is the aftershock, the debris, and a vast, echoing emptiness. Our wedding ceremony never resumed. The scene transformed from a celebration of love into a sterile, surreal tableau of a formal investigation. The military police arrived, their uniforms a stark, sobering contrast to the pastel dresses and crisp suits of our guests. I watched in a daze as friends and colleagues gave quiet, formal statements to uniformed officers. My beautiful three-tiered wedding cake, with its delicate sugar flowers, sat untouched on a linen-draped table, a monument to a future that had been violently interrupted. Through it all, I saw my parents. They weren't yelling or crying. They were huddled in a corner with a military lawyer, their faces tight masks of controlled fury. They were managing the damage, not grieving the wound. Not once did they look at me. It was as if by striking me, Ryan had successfully rendered me invisible to them forever. Jack and I didn't say goodbye. We just left. We slipped away from the wreckage of our own wedding, leaving behind the quiet murmurs of official procedure and the ghost of what should have been the happiest day of our lives. The silence in our apartment was different. It wasn't the tense silence of my childhood home, nor the focused silence of a mission plan. This was a hollow silence, the kind that rushes in to fill a vacuum. The adrenaline from the confrontation had drained away, taking the rage and the triumph with it, leaving behind a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. I sank onto the sofa, still in my wedding dress. The delicate lace was rumpled, a small brownish stain of dried blood marring the bodice. The dress felt like a costume from another life, a role I had briefly played and then forgotten. My jaw ached with a dull, throbbing rhythm. Jack didn't speak. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He simply began the quiet work of caring for me. He knelt before me and carefully unpinned my veil, his fingers gentle as he worked the bobby pins from my hair. He returned from the bedroom with a soft t-shirt and sweatpants, laying them beside me. Then, from the kitchen, I heard the freezer door open, the clink of a mug, the click of the kettle. He came back with an ice pack wrapped in a dish towel and a steaming mug of what smelled like chamomile tea. He gently placed the ice pack against my swollen jaw, the cold a welcome shock against the persistent ache, and set the mug on the coffee table. His actions were a quiet language of their own, speaking more eloquently than any words could. They said, "I am here. I will take care of the practical things. You just need to breathe." We sat like that for a long time, in the deepening twilight. The fierce warrior who had faced down her family was gone. In her place was just a woman in a ruined dress, feeling an immense and sorrowful weight settling upon her. Finally, I broke the silence, my voice raspy. "I won," I whispered, the words tasting strange. "I finally won. But why does it feel like I've lost?" Jack moved from the armchair to sit beside me on the sofa. He took my hand, his palm warm and steady around mine. He didn't try to deny my feelings or offer a pep talk. He just looked at me with that deep, unwavering empathy that had first drawn me to him. "Because every victory in a war like this comes at a cost," he said softly. "You had to destroy a part of your past to clear a path for your future. You're not mourning the loss of the family you had, Erica. You're grieving for the family you deserve to have. And it's okay to feel that. You're allowed to grieve." His words pierced through the confusion, naming the formless ache in my chest. Grief. That's what it was. I was grieving for the idea of a mother who would have rushed to my side, for a father who would have defended my honor, for a brother who would have been my protector, not my assailant. I was grieving for a fantasy I'd clung to for 27 years. And the finality of its death was heartbreaking. A few days later, the rawness of the grief began to subside, replaced by a need for a final, private closure. I sat at our kitchen table and began to write a letter to my parents. I wrote for hours, the words pouring out of me. I wrote about the humiliation of the cranberry-stained acceptance letter, the years of dismissive comments, the constant feeling of being an afterthought. I wrote about their chilling silence in the garden as I stood there, bleeding and betrayed. I wrote until my hand cramped and my soul felt empty, until every last drop of poison had been drawn out onto the page. I folded the letter, thick with unspoken truths, and sealed it in an envelope. But I didn't write an address on it. I knew then I wasn't writing it for them. I would never get the understanding or the apology I once craved. Their approval was a currency I no longer accepted. I had written it for me. I carried the letter to the kitchen sink. With a click of a lighter, I touched the flame to the corner. I watched the fire consume the paper, turning the angry, painful words into black, curling ash. It wasn't an act of anger. It was an act of liberation. A final, ceremonial severing of a cord that should have been cut long ago. As the last embers died, I washed the ashes down the drain, and with them, the need for them to ever understand. My healing didn't depend on their forgiveness or remorse. It only depended on me. I thought of a speech by Theodore Roosevelt I'd once studied, the one about the man in the arena. "It's not the critic who counts," he said, "but the one whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who dares greatly." I hadn't won a clean victory. My face was bruised, my spirit weary. But I had been in the arena. I had dared to speak the truth. The past was now a pile of ash. The war that had defined my entire life was finally over. And in the quiet aftermath, a new, daunting question began to form in my mind. So, what does life after the war look like? The question left in the wake of the ashes, "What does life after the war look like?" was answered not with a grand strategy, but with a quiet, deliberate choice. After the investigation concluded and Ryan was forced into a dishonorable discharge that stripped him of the identity he held so dear, Jack and I sat down and had the most important conversation of our lives. We still had years left on our contracts, a clear path for promotion, a future mapped out by the institution that had, for better or worse, made us who we were. And we chose to walk away from it all. It wasn't a retreat. It wasn't a surrender. It was a conscious, intentional pivot away from a world defined by rank and conflict. The Marine Corps had given us discipline, strength, and each other, but it had also demanded a piece of our souls in return. We wanted a life where our value wasn't determined by the insignia on our collars, a life built on our own terms. With the money we had saved, we bought a small, weathered, cedar-shingled house on the Oregon coast, a few miles south of Cannon Beach. The contrast to our life in San Diego was immediate and visceral. The screaming roar of FA-18s taking off from Miramar was replaced by the deep, rhythmic sigh of the Pacific Ocean and the lonely cry of gulls riding the wind. The manicured lawns and identical houses of military suburbs gave way to towering Sitka spruce trees, dense forests shrouded in mist, and a wild, untamed coastline. Our new drills were learning how to fix a leaky roof and how to stack firewood for the damp, chilly winters. Our long marches were hikes through lush trails, the air thick with the smell of pine and damp earth. Life slowed down. We found a new rhythm, one dictated by the tides and the seasons, not by a deployment schedule. Jack, who had always had a quiet talent for working with his hands, built a small woodworking shop in the garage. He started crafting beautiful, simple furniture from reclaimed lumber, and the focused, peaceful look on his face as he worked was something I had never seen before. And I started to write. At first, it was just for myself, filling journals with thoughts and observations. But slowly, I began to piece together my own story, not as an intelligence report, but as a testament. The rigid discipline I'd learned in the Corps found a new purpose, not in analyzing enemy movements, but in structuring sentences and building a narrative, my own narrative. One morning, several months into our new life, an email appeared in my inbox with a subject line that made my heart skip a beat. From a fellow Marine. It was from a young female corporal who had served in Ryan's unit. I opened it with a sense of dread, but what I found inside was not what I expected. She wrote that for years, Ryan had been a quiet terror in the unit, known for his explosive temper and inappropriate remarks, especially towards the junior female Marines. But no one had ever dared to report him. He was a golden boy, protected by his reputation and the unspoken code of silence. Captain, she wrote, when we heard what happened at your wedding and what you did, it was like a crack in a dam. You showed us that he wasn't untouchable. Because of you, I found the courage to file a formal complaint about his harassment, and after I did, 3 other women did too. The investigation that led to his discharge didn't just start with the assault. It started with you giving us a voice. You didn't just save yourself, you saved a lot of us too. I read the email 3 times, the words blurring through the tears that were now streaming down my face. For the first time since that horrible day, I cried. But these weren't tears of grief or pain. They were tears of profound, overwhelming relief. The war I had fought, the public humiliation, the severing of my family. It hadn't just been for me. My private pain had become a public beacon, a small lighthouse cutting through the fog for others who were lost in the same silence. My victory was their victory too. A year to the day after our ruined wedding, Jack and I walked down to the beach at dawn. There was no white dress, no pristine uniform, just the 2 of us in jeans and warm sweaters, the cold sand crunching under our boots. The sky was a soft gray, the color of pearl, and a light mist hung over the ocean. In our hands, we held new vows we'd written for each other. Standing there, with the massive silhouette of Haystack Rock in the distance, we read them aloud, our voices carried away by the salty wind. They weren't vows about honor and duty in the traditional sense. They were vows of partnership, of mutual respect, of building a life of quiet intention. Vows to be each other's safe harbor, to protect each other's peace. As we finished, the sun finally broke through the morning mist, casting a brilliant, golden path across the surface of the Pacific. I took a deep, cleansing breath, filling my lungs with the crisp, clean air. In that moment, looking at the man I loved, with the sound of the ocean as our witness, I finally understood. I was no longer a victim. I was no longer a warrior. I was simply free. And that was the greatest victory of all. My journey began in a war I never chose, but it ended here, in a peace I built for myself. This story is my own, but its heart belongs to anyone who has ever had to fight to be seen, or struggled to find their voice in the silence. Know that your own peaceful shore is waiting for you, and you have the strength within you to reach it. If my story gave you a piece of hope today, please hit the like button. Subscribe for more stories about finding strength in the quiet places, and share this with someone who needs to be reminded that they can win their own war. Thank you for listening and for being part of my victory.